Good day, my name is Jason Olson and I'm the creator and owner of the blog willbejunction.com, a blog dedicated to my model railroad in N-scale. In a previous video I did was an unboxing of the Woodland Scenic Mountain Diorama kit. Well, today starts video number 1 of my series of actually building said kit. If you wish to see that unboxing video, go ahead and to YouTube or my site willbejunction.com, in which I discuss all the contents of that box plus some additional contents that weren't provided and a brief discussion of some techniques. Anyway, to get this started off, I've actually taken the base out of its plastic, and I've taken the cardboard sheets out of the Woodland Scenic kit. And if you recall, there's two pieces of cardboard that looks like this. It's folded, and this becomes part of the diorama. Now, with the base, which I have over here, you can see how this fits in. There's a groove here that goes around the base, and one piece of cardboard fits in this way. The second piece of cardboard would fit in like this. This would provide the background and some of the structural integrity for the kit. What you want to do is probably take a pencil, and in this case I have a mechanical pencil, and you're going to draw your mountainscape or your background, and maybe even some of your foreground on the inside of this cardboard here, and then using a utility knife, and in this case I have two utility knives. I have one here which is really nice because it's a small blade, and when the blade gets dull you just crack it off and a new blade comes in its place. Otherwise, traditional box cutter might work as well, or a pair of very, very sharp scissors. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut the cardboard so that we form our like I said, our mountain background or part of our foreground. Before I even started doing that, one thing that's not in the kit, but it's kind of my own idea, so I took a piece of paper here, and just a regular 8x10 piece of paper, and I divided it into a quadrant. And on my quadrant here, you can sketch out what you think what you want your background to look like, or your model or your diorama. I used the top part to kind of start tracing what I thought the background would be like so I cut the cardboard. And the bottom half is kind of more of a top down, if I were to look exactly down onto the model and get an idea of what the footprint is, and that way I can size things appropriately. So in my diorama, what I'm going to do for you here is I have some mountains in the background. In the foreground I'm going to have a small water feature, probably a small little lake, maybe a pond. And then over here, when this is cut very low, I'm going to go ahead and add one of my N-scale models there. So you can see this footprint here of how big the models are compared to the base. Anyway, let's go ahead and start tracing or start sketching out our mountain and contours on our cardboard. Hey there! Now that I've went ahead and marked off with using my pencil the backdrop, you can see I've used my trusty utility knife here, and I will slowly cut by hand out my cardboard, my two panels of cardboard, where they meet nice and snug here in the back. But I do have a small gap up here in the front, and we can correct that later with some of the leftover cardboard. You can see here that in my backdrop here, that this would be the tallest peak of my mountain. I kind of go down and I have like another little peak. Probably my theory is going to be I'm going to have a small rut coming through. I'll have two distinct mountain faces here. And again, to give you an idea of the scale, here's my N-scale structure, and this is the footprint of what it's going to look like. Now, why did I leave this front about an inch up here in the front? Because I wanted to raise this up a little bit. By the time I add my newspaper or styrofoam and my plaster, this is actually, my structures are going to sit up a little bit, and what's even good about that is this is going to allow me to cut my little river that I was talking about earlier to give it a below ground level. So that's going to add some depth on there instead of trying to add it on top of everything. This is actually going to let me countersink it into the earth there. So right now my next step is I'm going to paint this. I'm going to paint the cardboard jet black. You don't need to do it, but I suggest going ahead and doing it because this is going to be the front of my diorama, and when you turn it all the way around, it's going to be black to match the base. Thanks. Okay, now we're ready to pour our plaster into the rock molds. Woodland Scenic provides this 3-piece rock mold here that's made out of this cheap acetate plastic, and the instructions ask for you to shake the bag of hydrocal or plaster for at least 1 minute before you open it up. I'm assuming to loosen up any clumps that might have formed during transportation or sitting on the shelf. And then go ahead and with a tablespoon and the tongue depressor or popsicle stick that came with the kit, measure off 6 level tablespoons of hydrocal into 2 tablespoons of water. So in this little Tupperware bowl here, I actually already have 2 tablespoons of water waiting. And what I did is I've taken 6 level teaspoons of the hydrocal plaster and already measured it out, and I'm going to slowly add this to the water per the instructions. Now, using my tongue depressor, I'm going to slowly start mixing this up a little bit. Make sure that the water starts adhering. It's going to take about a minute before it starts to set up into actual plaster. So we'll let the water soak in for a minute. And in the meantime, one of the funny things I thought was that per the instructions on this booklet, that the hydrocal that comes in this diorama kit only allows for 1.5 pours of this rock mold. I thought that was kind of weird. Why not just for a couple pennies more? Why can't we have enough plaster to fill this up at least twice? Depending on the size of your diorama, you might want to make a couple of rocks, or you might the first rock that comes out might crack. And so I think that's a little cheap on their end to only give you enough to pour 1.5 times. So more or less, they're telling you that you need to get this exactly right the first time through. So in the meantime, my plaster is starting to get a pretty decent consistency here. Mix this up a little bit better. Get some of this powder off the sides here. Make sure you get deep into the corners. To be honest with you, it doesn't look like a lot, that's for sure. So we'll pour the big ones first, and then if there's any left over, we'll definitely do the smaller ones. But anyway, again, it's a 3-to-1 ratio, or in other words, 6 tablespoons of water, or 6 tablespoons of plaster to 2 tablespoons of water. Okay, that looks like it's pretty good mix, so I'm going to start pouring it into my molds here. Look at it, nice and even consistency. Yeah, I'm a little skeptical per the instructions here that this is going to fill. It looks like I just might be able to fill up one of these, one of the large ones. I might only have enough to do the smaller one here, which I think I'll just do the smaller one. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to have a lot. That one pretty much filled out, this top one here. I'm just kind of moving it into the corners a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to get the rest of this and pour it into my second mold. sure I scrape down all the sides here. Now, this is going to take, depending on the weather or how hot or humid it is in your where you're ever preparing this, it's going to take 2 to 3 hours for this to set up. So, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go ahead and let this go the full 3 hours here. Yeah, this looks like I'm only going to get enough plaster here just to two rock facings. So let me get every little last drop in here, and over time this will settle a little bit more. I'm going to pat it down again, just kind of smooth it into the corners, make sure I get full coverage of the mold. Okay, now one last thing you need to know about is on cleanup of these rocks. You cannot pour plaster down your garbage disposal or kitchen sink. It's better to clean this up outside because you are working with plaster after all, and it will harden up in the pipes. So whatever you do, again, I'm going to want to save my tongue depressor here, but I do not want to put it in, clean everything up in the kitchen sink. Okay, we're back, and if you remember the last section here, I had just poured my plaster into the rock mold here, and even though the directions said to go ahead and let it cure to 2 to 3 hours, I let it cure for a whole 24 hours, and then simply by just pushing on the back underneath, I was able to pop them out. So I've got 3 plaster pieces here, and there's a little bit of flashing that I can cut off with either a razor blade or sand down with some coarse grit sandpaper, which I'm probably going to have to do anyways, because you can see the back side. We got some bumps in here, and of course I want this to lay flush up against my mountain, so I'm going to go ahead. I don't want it sticking out in any way, shape, or form, so I'm going to go ahead and have to sand this down so it's nice and flush and even. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of plaster that came with the kit, and even though the kit said you could pour 1.5 molds, I didn't find that to be the case. Follow the instructions of 3 parts plaster to 1 part water. There really is only enough plaster to either make 1 more additional small rock, or in this case I did about 2/3 of one of the larger rock facings here. So I'm going to have to let this one cure. It's going to be a slightly smaller than this one here, and I might flip it to give it flip it so it looks so slightly different, so I won't get the same pattern effect there. But overall, I had to reserve just a tiny bit over left of the plaster because I'm going to have to use some fresh plaster to go ahead and adhere it to my mountain when I get to that stage. But unfortunately, yeah, I wish this kit would have come with a few more tablespoons of plaster. It would have been nice to have done one more large mold as it was and still have some left over, but that just isn't the case. So getting back to the base and the diorama itself, you can see at this point I went ahead and I've cut my cardboard, and using a utility knife I slowly made somewhat similar to what the picture shows. I have a large mountaintop in the back. It's going to dip down a little bit. I'm going to have another rise and come down to about 1 inch all the way around is going to be my base. Now, why did I choose 1 inch? Well, because I didn't want my diorama to be exactly flat. I want to be able, to add some newspaper in here, and when I lay the plaster cloth, when I form the actual mountain itself, it'll give me a chance to form some uneven earth surface. This is also going to let me to dig or form a little trench, if you will, for either a river or my little pond that I want to put in here. So I have to create some sort of artificial depth to this in order for me to get that. So lastly, I've also painted it black, and that was one of the things I wanted to do, is using a can of spray paint. You can see I've painted the cardboard here a flat black to match the base. And also here, you can see where the two pieces of cardboard come together really nicely here in the back, but in the front, it didn't quite match up. So I'm going to have to cut another little small piece of cardboard, paint it black, and insert it into here. And then what I'll probably end up doing is with some of the additional spare cardboard that I have, I'm just going to brace this up to make it one solid piece here. And that's okay. You're not going to see it because when I get to the point in the next video where I'm forming the mountains and we're laying the plaster cloth over it, of course all this is going to be hidden, so you won't see any of that. So anyway, again, I'm going to let this last rock face cure for a few hours, and then we'll go ahead and start with our newspaper and start forming the body and the mountain of our diorama kit. So stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.